Thank you, Patty, for that really lovely introduction. It's always so embarrassing to hear these introductions about yourself. I don't know if I can recreate what we did at ACRL, but I'm going to definitely give you my 100% best today, share with you some things that I'm working on right now in a book that's forthcoming, and then I really want to share for the first time some new work that I haven't presented before, and I'll be looking forward to your feedback on it too. So let's get started, and I'll try to keep us on track here with time. I have to set my little timer, or it gets crazy, and then you'll be like, cut it. All right. So first of all, I want to thank Douglas College, the Douglas Library, and also everyone who's joining us on the webcast. I'm going to talk primarily today about Google, and so a lot of people have a hard time with this conversation, especially when I share some of my research with my undergraduates. They get really upset, like I'm talking about their mama, you know. So you have to bear with me. We're going to have some critiques today, but hopefully they will open up some new ways of thinking about the ways in which we've really surrendered a lot of our decision-making processes to algorithms, and what some of the consequences of that can be for people who are already in the margin, but also more broadly, I want to raise some critiques about our kind of over-dependence upon technology in this highly technological presentation that we're doing here. So we'll just go with it. All right. Some of you might be familiar with this ad. In October of 2013, the United Nations launched this campaign, and it was directed by Nimak Ogilvy and Mather Dubai using genuine Google searches. The campaign was really designed to bring attention to the sexist and discriminatory ways in which women are regarded and denied human rights. Over the mouths of various women of color were the auto-suggests that reflected the most popular searches that take place in Google search. So some of these, which are hard to read, I'll read for you, say things like, women cannot drive, be bishops, be trusted, speak in church, women shouldn't have rights, vote, work, box. I'm personally okay with the boxing part. Women should stay at home, be slaves, be in the kitchen, not speak in church. Women need to be put in their places, know their place, be controlled, be disciplined. Christopher Hunt, the art director of the campaign, said in this UN report, quote, when we came across these searches, we were shocked by how negative they were, and we decided we had to do something with them. Now, what the campaign determined to show is really how shocking the ad would be, and really how far we still have to go to achieve gender equality. But I found them even more interesting because this campaign reflects our common sense way of thinking about Google search results or commercial search engine results, which is whatever we get is a result of what is most popular. Right? So this campaign is really getting at this idea that these are the popular ideas that are still circulating on the internet about women. What it doesn't, however, point to, and that what I read when I saw this campaign, were the ways in which these ideas are actually quite profitable, and that's also one of the reasons why they circulate and why we see them at the top of the search pile. So today I'm going to talk about kind of why we should be concerned about that. I won't be able to get into some of the more detailed research about how Google makes money or how commercial platforms make their money off of the kinds of queries we do, but I can direct you to things that you can read, other things that I've written and things that other people have written. But I will summarize and say that part of what's happening is the spectacle of sexism itself is incredibly profitable. People click on kind of some of the worst, most banal, racist, sexist, derogatory kinds of information, and those clicks really lead to big money on the internet. So it's not just a matter of what's profitable, it's that platforms and algorithms are also financially invested in having things that are highly clickable surface to the top. Okay? And that's something that's important. I guess when I think about kind of our rush toward these kind of digital projects and digital investments, I think about what my colleague Sarah Roberts, who's at Western University here in Canada, she says, she often says, we're in a rush toward digital humanities, but what about the digital is improving our humanity, right? So we're really focused in my field, in particular in LIS and digital humanities, on the digital, but not the humanity part. And so that's one of the things that I really want to talk about as well today. All right, now, some of you might have seen this this summer in the Washington Post. Here was a tweet that went out by D. Ray McKesson. D. Ray McKesson is a very well-known Black Lives Matter activist, and he has a tremendous amount of kind of social media influence, especially on Twitter. And so he tweeted, and this really is what caught the attention of the Post. He said, if you Google map the N-word house, this is what you'll find. Because America, right? And what was happening at the time was that if you went into Google Maps and you typed in the N-word, but not the N-word, because I say the N-word because I don't say the N-word, but the real N-word, if you typed in the N-word house, it would lead you to the White House. That's where the pin would go in Google Maps. Also, if you typed in the N-word king, it would take you to a pin at the White House. And so the Washington Post wrote about this and kind of took a hold, and a lot of media outlets picked it up. And, Google issued a statement. They said, quote, some inappropriate results are surfacing in Google Maps that should not be, and we apologize for any offense this may have caused. That always makes me laugh, because if my husband upset me or offended me, and he was like, I'm sorry if you're offended, I wouldn't really take it as an apology, but we're going to go with it. They said, a Google spokesperson told the U.S. News in an email late Tuesday, they say, quote, our teams are working to fix this issue quickly. Now, there are lots of examples of these kinds of situations that happen in digital media platforms, particularly in Google. And this is a typical kind of Google response, which is, this is a technical issue that we're going to fix, or it's a glitch in the system. And oftentimes the way in which these kind of blatantly racist results occur is they occur in the context of being a glitch, rather than point us to some more nuanced ways of thinking about what might in fact be happening in our systems. And so I find that kind of talking about glitches in systems really obscure the organizing logics of the web, and really signal that these are kind of one-offs rather than an undercurrent about how the web works. Latoya Peterson, who's she's an incredible blogger, and she's a founder of Racialicious, a blog. She talks often about racism being like a API of the internet, right? That there's a fundamental organizing logic, and many other scholars have talked about this. Laurie Kendall wrote a piece decades ago about kind of hanging out in the virtual pub and the way that white masculinity in particular is an organizing logic on the internet, especially in the early days, but we still see that. And of course, this is one of the reasons why people talk so much about the need for diversity in tech companies, as if that will somehow entirely fix the problem of kind of these blind spots. And so we'll look more closely at that in a moment. Now, part of the reason why I look at algorithms, and the book is called Algorithms of Oppression, is because algorithms have really become so important and fundamental to the way in which we make decisions today. Tarleton Gillespie, who is a very well-known scholar who writes about algorithms, he says the algorithmic assessment of information then represents a particular knowledge logic, one built on specific presumptions about what knowledge is and how one should identify its most relevant components. That we are now turning to algorithms to identify what we need to know is as momentous as having relied on credentialed experts, the scientific method, common sense, or the Word of God. And the only thing missing is, and the librarians. Okay, because that's really the only kind of missing expert. I guess we're the credentialed experts. So this is important because really in many ways you see this kind of hyper-reliance upon algorithmic decision-making to help guide us in a way that engenders our abandonment of making decisions ourselves. And of course, there's also, a whole variety of implications about that kind of hyper-reliance on algorithms, like that algorithms can help us make decisions in seconds instead of maybe centuries. Some of the human problems and human conditions that we've grappled with, maybe for millennia, that maybe somehow an algorithm can go through so much data and quickly answer questions. And you see this many times, those of you who are on faculty or teach, librarians, working with students, this idea, this conditioning for an instant kind of answer or response, or that we should be able to know very quickly. And these, I think, again, there's some cautions that we might take there. The other thing that's interesting that I've been looking at is, at the very kind of historical moment when people of color and women are legally, at least certainly in the United States, allowed to participate in the workforce, in decision making, when we're kind of discrimination is legally outlawed. At the very moment that you start to see more empowerment and opportunity for people to be involved in decision making, we simultaneously have the rise of the colorblind technocracy, where we simultaneously then outsource our decisions to machines rather than people. And this is also something that we might query or ask ourselves more about, and certainly something I'm thinking of. Every academic has to have one slide with too many words. That's this one. I'm going to try not to do it again. But I want to kind of give you a sense, truly in an academic context, of where I'm coming from, what some of the theoretical frameworks are that I use to engage in some of these research inquiries. So first of all, the social construction of technology. Of course, many of us are very familiar with this idea of the social construction of race, the social construction of gender, that these are kind of human limits or practices that we engage in. In many ways, people talk about technology, however, not as a social construction. And so I'm really engaging with the kind of Scott theorists, people like Langdon Winter, Arnold Pacey. There are so many who are looking at the true political implications of technology. That technologies are, in fact, created by human beings. Therefore, they are explicitly value-laden, because they're a product of our human creativity. And that's a very important framework, particularly in our fields of information science, information studies, media studies, digital media studies, where there has been a tendency to see technology as neutral and simply as a tool. Right? And so it's important that we problematize this idea that technology is neutral, when in fact it is incredibly social and political. I'm also probably one of the few people in my field who are taking up black feminism and critical race theory. I know that at least up until maybe right now, someone's doing black feminism and critical race theory and technology, but really hasn't been kind of explicitly engaged in this way. What's been helpful about that is to be able to, one, ask different questions that have previously been asked. Many of the people who do work, for example, on Google or who are critiquing Google are not thinking about the implications of Google's practices, business practices, with respect to women of color. So this is a place where I'm able to kind of make a contribution. What I'm looking at specifically are, writers like Bell Hooks, Patricia Hill Collins, even Cheryl Harris and Kimberly Crenshaw, looking at how power is expressed through our technologies in kind of a historical, social, and economic lens. But I'm also interested in actionable anti-racist work. So I often will tell graduate students that I work with, for example, work on research that makes sense, that is actionable, that you could do something in the world with it. I mean, it's cool if 50 or 100 people know about that very specific thing that you're talking about, but it's even more cool when hundreds of thousands or millions of people can understand the contribution that you're making as a scholar. And so this is important to me in terms of the time that one spends doing research, that it can be actionable and have impact. And then, critical information studies is really an important new area that I think over the last couple of decades we've really been trying to invest in. At UCLA, I feel very lucky to work in the Department of Information Studies at UCLA. It's probably well known, along with places like Toronto, for really bringing these critical lenses to library and information studies practices. Okay, so why question Google? Google dominates the landscape in terms of search engine use, and this is really important. So this is data from Pew Research Center's Internet and American Life project. They do kind of a every 10 years or so, a search engine use survey. This is from their 2012. You can see the growth in Google's market control from 47% in 2004 to 83% in 2012. If we were to look at the mobile market, search market, it would be significantly more than that, 83%. And so this is one of the reasons. When you have one company that really is a monopoly leader, then you have to really interrogate their practices because everyone else is trying to follow the monopoly leader. And of course, we see this every once in a while. Bing or Yahoo gets busted for trying to scrape Google's algorithm. And so this is really important. In the United States, we really, quite unfortunately, the Federal Trade Commission has ruled that Google is not a monopoly. But fortunately, in Europe and the EU, they are taking a much more close look at Google's monopoly practices. And so there's some hope that maybe we will be able to come back and revisit that conversation in the States. Here's something that I think is most important from Pew's research. All right, I'll tell you what they say. According to Pew, users report generally good outcomes and relatively high confidence in the capabilities of search. 73% of search engine users say that most or all of the information they find as they use search engines is accurate and trustworthy. And 66% of search engine users say search engines are a fair and unbiased source of information. That's pretty powerful, that the majority of the public in the U.S. at least really believes that search engines are fair, they're unbiased, that the information that you get is credible. And so this is really one of the reasons why I think we have to pay very close attention to what Google is serving up. Now, the first really important studies in Google in 2000, Helen Niesenbaum and Lucas Antrona wrote this great paper, Shaping the Web, Why the Politics of Search Engine Matters. They said in that paper, leading search engines give prominence to popular, wealthy, and powerful sites via the technical mechanisms of crawling, indexing, and ranking algorithms, as well as through human-mediated trading of prominence for a fee at the expense of others. So this is what we know about how search engines work, which is if you have a lot of capital, you are able to, in essence, game the system, or you're able to have more purchasing power in the advertising context of Google, which again, we have to remember, and I try to say this as many times as possible, Google provides an advertising algorithm, not an information retrieval algorithm. And this is something that we really have to keep at the forefront. So, as a person who used to be in advertising, being an academic is my second career. My first career was in marketing and advertising, which is one of the reasons why I was led to kind of study Google, because I know how dirty and evil it is. I know what money can buy, and it's really powerful to think that to become an academic and then see people engage with Google as an information public good type of resource rather than as an advertising company. That was actually one of the things that compelled me to start researching Google more closely. Now, Niesenbaum and Antrona aren't the only folks who are looking at the kind of precarity of Google search engines. Obviously, People like Matthew Hinman, who wrote a great book called The Myth of Digital Democracy, also has been writing about the way in which, for example, the control and influence of money on political campaigns, for example, on the web is really important. That, you know, he really looks at kind of this political economy of the web and how money controls the way in which information flows on the web, and it's really not the kind of democracy that we think is happening entirely on the internet. There's also a great organization, consumerwatchdog.org. They have an important report called Inside Google, traffic report, how Google is squeezing out competitors and muscling into new markets. And if you look at their June 2010 report, they really detail, and it's a great teaching tool to use, they detail the way that Google effectively blocks sites that it competes with and prioritizes its own properties to the top of the search pile. So, for example, if you're looking for video, and you're doing a search on it, you're going to get YouTube videos before you get videos in Vimeo or some other platform, right? You're going to get Google Maps before you get MapQuest or Google Images over PhotoBucket. And so I think this is important, again, that we start thinking about this kind of political and economic dimension of what kind of information gets prioritized and how we might intervene upon that, if we will be able to at all. Another set of researchers who are also looking at Google, here we have a study. This is actually a very critical essay written against the study, but in Forbes magazine, of course, so that would be an appropriate place for this kind of upset about Epstein and Robertson. But they found in their 2013 study that democracy was at risk because manipulating search rankings could shift voters' preferences substantially without their awareness. Now, what they found in their study was that the tenor of stories about a candidate, whether favorable or unfavorable, in search engine results dramatically affected the way that candidates voted. They said in their study, quote, "The outcomes of real elections, especially tight races, can conceivably be determined by the strategic manipulation of search engine rankings, and that the manipulation can be accomplished without people being aware of it. We speculate that unregulated search engines could pose a serious threat to the democratic system of government." And again, this was very consistent with Hinman's previous findings. I agree with Epstein and Robertson that we really have to think about the public consequences of unregulated commercial search environments, particularly in light of the Pew research that tells us that people trust and believe in what they find. So in Robertson and Epstein study, they just found if in these controlled studies, if news stories about a candidate were negative, people didn't vote for them. If they were positive, they did. So we know, and of course we're in an incredibly contentious presidential race that's developing that I cannot even go into because that will derail everything that's going on. So, imagine, though, how many people now are going to the web and looking, and, of course, the amount of money that one has to control the story or to boost the placement of a particular kind of narrative about a candidate. Trump, I'm not just saying, I'm not going to pick on anybody, but that's an incredible amount of money. So, again, these are things that I think we want to be aware of in how we're thinking through search. Herbert Schiller, who's an amazing scholar, and I highly every graduate student should be you shouldn't be able to graduate without reading Herbert Schiller. I've just decided. He wrote a really important piece in 1996 in this book, Information Inequality, The Deepening Social Crisis in America, where he said, the American economy is now hostage to a relatively small number of giant private companies with interlocking connections that set the national agenda. This power is particularly characteristic of the communication and information information sector, where the national cultural media agenda is provided by a very small and declining number of integrated private combines. The development has deeply eroded free individual expression, a vital element of a democratic society. And of course, you know that if you take your kind of introductory graduate courses in library science, if you're fortunate, you'll read about like the history of newspapers in the United States, or in your journalism or media studies, where there was a time that we had hundreds of thousands of different kinds of communication channels. In fact, if it weren't for having so many competing ideas in massive circulation, we probably wouldn't have had the abolition of slavery or the suffrage movement in the United States. At least we certainly, those would have been significantly delayed. And so that we now have 5 or 6 major corporations who control all of the media messaging is really important, and that's not just in kind of North America, but you know we see this in the outpouring of this and kind of in more global tensions. And so we have to, again, be concerned. And Google, I would say, and many of these digital media platforms are starting to become major players in this process, because if you want news about something and you go to the web, you don't know a specific place to go, you're going to do a search. And that broker, that information broker, is going to take you most likely to the major media outlets. So, you know, you're not going to get the local or even necessarily the critical critique or a different take on what's happening. So this is the part of my presentation where, you know, I'm glad it's afternoon. You might need a cocktail after this. This is the work that I've really mostly been known for. And so what happened is that in 2009, I started collecting searches on a variety of keywords that were racialized and gendered. And so I started looking at black girls, Asian girls, Latina girls. I also looked at women. And in 2009, the first hit when you did a keyword search on the word black girls was hotblackpussy.com. I'm going to say pussy a whole bunch right now, so just bear with me, and then we're going to get through it. By 2011, they were out of business, and sugaryblackpussy.com was the way in which black girls in the United States were represented. That's not searching for black girls and sex. It's not searching for black girls in porn. Black girls had become synonymous with porn because it was a shortcut that was highly profitable in search engines. Followed by black girls, free music, tour dates, photos, videos. I don't know, maybe you guys know because we're in Canada. Anybody know of the UK band, the Black Girls? It's like no one knows them. Every time I give this talk, they're like, who is that? Anyway, these guys have been incredibly effective. I don't know why their band is named the Black Girls, but it is, and they were number 2. And followed by Two Black Girls Love Cock, Red Tube, Free Big Tits, Porn Videos, Anal, followed by Black Girls, Big Booty Black Girls, Black Porn, Black Pussy, Black Girls, 100% Free Black Girls Chat, Black Girls, again, the band, on Facebook, Black Girls, Ebony Sex Threesome, and Black Girl with Long Hair, which is a blog. So I started, again, following, and not just black girls and these searches, but really trying to understand how is it that these could be the primary representations when, at the time, really in 2009, I think Raven-Symoné was still like a popular black girl in the United States that kind of fell off. Certainly, Sasha and Malia Obama were really important black girls, and a host of others. And so this is when I started kind of parsing this issue. Now, I wanted to write about this for Essence Magazine, which is a magazine that focuses on women of color, mostly African American women. And I couldn't get them to be even slightly interested because who cares about an unknown person? You have to be like a really published, important writer or person to get to write for them. So I contacted Bitch Magazine, which is a small magazine that does kind of feminist critique of popular culture, media, and technology, and they had a special call out for kind of looking at the internet and cyberculture. And I said, you got to let me write for you about how this is happening to how girls, adolescent and girls are being co-opted with pornography, because of course all of these sites that are hypersexualized are, allegedly women who are 18 and over. So that women are also coded as girls is kind of like a sexism 101. But I thought this was an interesting phenomenon, and it would give us a chance to kind of get this story out to a public audience. They were completely not interested. And I said, listen, you got to be kidding. And they said, yeah, everybody knows when you search for girls, you're going to get porn. Do they? So, okay. If they do, how about this? I went back and forth with them, and I emailed and said, okay, I would like you to do a search on women's magazines, and just let me know if Bitch Magazine shows up in the first 5 pages, let alone the first page, because the first page is the most important. The majority of search engine users, if you look at kind of the information retrieval literature, particularly around kind of search engines and databases, people really don't go beyond the first page of results. And so what happens on that first page is incredibly important. So I said, just do a search. Let me know if you find Bitch Magazine in the first 5 pages. And they wrote back and said, okay, you can write the story. And what they've realized is that, and what I try to impress upon them, that the concept of feminism had been completely divorced from women. And so unless you were looking for a feminist magazine, it would be very hard to find Bitch Magazine. But, women need feminism, even if feminism is not coded for women on the web. Right? So it's important that we kind of think about what does it mean that a particular, again, dominant narratives about women's interests are decoupled from feminism in search. And I thought, and so that was great. So that's when I first wrote about this. And then I wrote a more scholarly piece here for Invisible Culture, and you can certainly take a look at that if you're interested. Here's just a quick hit. I won't spend a lot of time on this because I want to talk about some other things too. I want to talk about Yelp here before we conclude. But Asian girls porn pictures and movies, top hit. Okay. Latina girls on Facebook, hot Latina girls on Pinterest, Latina girl twerking, 50 hottest Latinas for Complex magazine, 5 girl on top sex positions he will never forget. Not sure how that's Latina, but okay. So again, these are just from 2014. These results here. Now, image search is also a place that I've been looking and kind of asking some questions. So this is Google image search results on the word beautiful on a 13-inch screen in 2013. Now you see, I didn't put beautiful women in the search. I honestly thought when I put beautiful in that I would get like nature. I'd get some shots of Vancouver. What? I mean, I don't know, that there'd be an ocean, some trees, because to me that's what's beautiful. But again, we have this kind of hegemonic idea, beauty ideal or beauty standard that gets represented as the concept beautiful. And I verify these searches. I have other people in other parts of the country collect searches. We try to use clean machines as much as we can. No one's logged into any media platforms. And so this is interesting. What's also interesting and why I kind of call out this idea of being on a 13-inch screen is that the hardware is certainly implicated in the kinds of results that we get. If we had a screen that, say, were the height of this building, we would get far more to choose from. But when we start getting into screens that are this size, now the implications of what's important is distilled for us even more. And so this is one of the things that I think is worth taking a look at. Black girls, again, kind of consistent with this hypersexualized imagery that we find in web searches as well. Now, this is not new, and then one of the things that is very important, and this is why projects like or theoretical frameworks like critical race theory are really helpful in Black feminism, is for us to see that the internet is in many ways replicating our old media practices. These are, we think of these sometimes as new media practices. I'm proud to say that about 6 months after that Bitch Magazine article circulated, that Google changed its algorithm, and when you search for black girls now, you don't get porn or hypersexualized content. I can't say that that's because of the Bitch Magazine article, but I can't say it wasn't. I'm not really sure. So, I think, again, it's important that we keep raising the visibility and talking about what we find. Some of these images and ideas are centuries old. And when you want to think about the way that our field in particular in library and information science is helping to intervene and do important education about kind of these historical trajectories and the point of sexist and kind of racist imagery in society. One of the great interventions in our field has been the Jim Crow Museum of Racist Memorabilia at Ferris University, and it's something that I often have my students study as an LIS intervention. Because what it's able to do, what they've been able to do there is collect a lot of these kinds of racist memorabilia and reframe them, recast them, and talk about them, historicize them in a way that helps us understand how powerful stereotypes are in affecting the kinds of distribution of resources that happen in our society. And so this, at the Jim Crow Museum, you'll see a very detailed kind of scholarly discussion of these stereotypes like the Jezebel whore or the Venus Hottentot, the sexualized black girl. And we see those again, those dominant narratives still circulating in our quote-unquote new media platforms. I call out here this postcard here from, the 19th century where, it's a derogatory image of a black girl child who's naked, holding two fans, and the caption says, "Honey, I'm waiting for you." Right? This is like a 4-year-old. So these are the kinds of images. I mean, I have sometimes students who tell me, like, "Oh yeah, my grandparents had things like that in their house," or "I remember seeing things like that." Another important way of thinking about our work in the LIS context is when I was looking for these kinds of images for my dissertation and for my book, I was looking through a very important large art image database that I will not name here, but everybody who's in the field will know, looking for images, these kinds of racist images. And I'm looking at racist memorabilia. Americana is sometimes how it's thought of. No images, none of these kinds of, which are very popular in the United States. These, especially when I was growing up, and I'm not like super old, but like kind of old. So these kind of up there. So these images were quite popular to me to see, and of course I know that they still circulate around the world. And it was very difficult to find them in the library database. Finally, I stumbled upon them, and you guess how they were coded, what the metadata was. Anyone want to guess? Black history. As I've given this talk before, people have reminded me that maybe that should be coded white history as a way of reframing again how we could talk about the way stereotypes are created and circulated. So this is really important as well for our own field when we think about how do we intervene as practitioners too in shaping and recasting and making sense of information. Jessica Davis and Oscar Gandy talk about media representations of people of color, particularly African Americans, that have been implicated in historical and contemporary racial projects. Such projects use stereotypic images to influence the redistribution of resources in ways that benefit dominant groups at the expense of others. And of course, we're living in an age right now where there's been a kind of a resurgence of racist narratives around the world, right, that are directly implicated in the public policy kinds of decisions that are being made. And so we have to, in fact, I was quite horrified to turn on the tube last night and see Donald Trump, arguing that no Muslims should be allowed to come into the United States, even if they are American citizens, and a kind of a closing of the borders. And so again, these kind of racist tropes and stereotypes that are used in the distribution of resources or in public policy is incredibly important. And it didn't start last night. These are centuries-old issues. Now, quickly, These are some other ways that we can think about how search gets used. It's not just searching for things, but it's also when Google is so helpful with auto-suggest. So I looked at a number of things like, why are black people so? And this is what I was led to. Why are black people so loud, athletic, lazy, fast, tall, mean, funny, religious, ghetto, rude? Why are black women so angry, loud, mean, attractive, lazy, annoying, confident, sassy, insecure, bitter? You know, if you think through the logic of what clicking on some of these would lead one to, and of course, again, going back to our profit schemes of how valuable those kinds of stereotypes are in an advertising context. Why are white women so pretty, beautiful, mean, easy, insecure, skinny, annoying, perfect, fake, rude? No one's winning here, okay? I just want to point that out. No one's winning. I wrote a paper about, during the kind of aftermath of the George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin case. Trayvon Martin was a young African-American teenager who was beaten to death and killed by George Zimmerman in his neighborhood where he lived. He was visiting his stepmother and with his dad, and I was looking to see again in what ways was Google auto-suggesting a kind of narrative for us about both Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman. And you can read more if you're interested in this piece in the Black Scholar. You can see Trayvon Martin was Google auto-suggest for us was a thug, was no angel, was a bad kid, was a racist. Washington Post, they were doing a lot of coverage, making lean. A drug dealer, was high, okay, stopping my timer, was not innocent, wasn't a good kid, whereas George Zimmerman is a hero, is innocent, is not white, is my hero, is guilty, dead, isn't white, is Hispanic, is not racist, is a murderer, right? So again, these tensions about representation that are happening that tell us a lot about where we can cut in on these conversations about identity. All right. This is the last thing I'm going to say about Google today. So this is the case of Dylan Stormroof. Dylan Stormroof is an admitted and committed white nationalist, 21-year-old who opened fire on unsuspecting African-American Christian worshipers at Mother Emanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in one of what we're calling the most heinous racial and religious hate crimes of recent memory. His attack led to the deaths of South Carolina State Senator Reverend Clementa Pinckney, as well as a number of people, including librarian Cynthia Hurd and a number of others. And when Dylan Stormroof was arrested and the FBI began investigating, some folks on social media found this kind of manifesto that he had left online at thelastRhodesian.com. And so I was really fascinated with this portion of his manifesto where he is talking about his own identity, racial identity formation. And so he says, quote, "The event that truly awakened me was the Trayvon Martin case. I kept hearing and seeing his name, and eventually I decided to look him up. I read the Wikipedia article, and right away I was unable to understand what the big deal was. It was obvious that Zimmerman was in the right. But more importantly, this prompted me to type in the words black on white crime into Google, and I have never been the same since that day. The first website I came to was the Council of Conservative Citizens. There were pages upon pages of these brutal black-on-white murders. I was in disbelief. At this moment, I realized that something was very wrong. How could the news be blowing up the Trayvon Martin case while hundreds of these black-on-white murders got ignored? From this point, I researched deeper and found out what was happening in Europe. I saw that the same things were happening in England and France and in all the other Western European countries. Again, I found myself in disbelief. As an American, we are taught to accept living in the melting pot, and black and other minorities have just as much right to be here as we do, since we are all immigrants. But Europe is the homeland of white people. And in many ways, the situation is even worse there. From here, I found out about the Jewish problem and other issues facing our race, and I can say today that I am completely racially aware." So here's a person talking about the way in which they, part of the way at least, that they're articulating in their own words that they developed their own racial consciousness, which is through Google searching, through Wikipedia, that he names. Now, what's interesting to me about this is that if you go, for example, to the Council of Conservative Citizens, if you're not familiar with the Council of Conservative Citizens, Council of Conservative Citizens is really the businessman's Ku Klux Klan in the United States. Okay, it's the respectable, more polished white supremacist organization. If you go to their website, it's a cloaked website. If you don't know what cloaked websites are, these are websites that pretend to be kind of a neutral information site that really are, in fact, invested in kind of circulating racist ideas. Jesse Daniels wrote a fantastic book called Cyber Racism that's really all about cloaked websites, and it's really important work that everyone should read. So the Council of Conservative Citizens looks like just a conservative news media aggregator, but in fact it is actually deeply invested in circulating these kinds of notions that would, in fact, I think we could say fuel a race war, or certainly exacerbate to the maximum the racial tensions in the U.S. and beyond. Now, what's interesting is when you do searches on black-on-white crime, what you don't get are, for example, the FBI statistics that point to the fact that the majority of homicides and crimes happen within group. They don't happen cross-culturally. So white people kill white people, Latinos kill Latinos, black people kill black people, because proximity is actually a major factor in how murder is committed. You also don't get an interrogation of the question, like that black on white crime is not a thing, because it's not a thing. It's not a phenomenon. It's not a social phenomenon at the level that Dylan Roof experiences it on the internet. And ultimately, we could say that this racial formation, this racial awareness and racial identity that he develops through his searching in what he believes to be, we could argue, if he's part of the broader public that we could say the Pew research is pointing to, that what he finds on the internet is trustworthy and credible. So we could say here that beyond the kinds of things that I've been looking at in the past around misrepresentation of women and women of color, that the outcomes of some of these kinds of egregious misinformation campaigns was horrific in this case, certainly. Now, last thing I'm going to share with you. I'm going to switch gears. This is some new work that's going to be in the book that I haven't talked about before. A lot of people get really upset, like I said, that all I talk about is Google. It makes for an interesting cocktail party, just put it that way. But I want to also talk about Yelp for a minute. And so when I was writing the book, I interviewed a woman, Candace, that I met across the country, and she started telling me about how a platform like Yelp, which works in a very similar kind of fashion that people search for in mostly businesses in that kind of context, or restaurants or entertainment kinds of things. But they're looking and they're led to. The algorithm points them towards something. And so this is a little bit about her story, and I'm going to try to quickly share this with you. So Candace has been in business for 30 years, and her primary clients are African American. And this is her story, which elucidates in a very personal way how algorithmic oppression works in her life and is affecting her very quality of life as a small business owner who runs the only local African-American hair salon within a predominantly white neighborhood located near a prestigious university in the United States. She says, "When I first came and opened up my shop here, there was a strong African-American community. There were black sororities and fraternities, and they had step shows, which no longer exist anymore. The Black Student Union organization was very strong. It was the 80s. Everyone felt like family, and everyone knew each other. Even though I only worked in this part of town, it was almost like I went to school there too. We all knew each other, and everyone celebrated each other's success. I often get invited to participate at the major events and celebrations, from marriages to their parents' funerals. For instance, I have several clients from the 80s who I still service to this day. Here it is 20 years later, and now I'm servicing their sons and daughters here, who may or may not attend the same university. The relationships are intact and so strong, it's not uncommon, even if I weren't always in touch for the past several years, for clients who may live on the other side of the country to send a recommendation my way. I have worked in this community for 30 years. I know a lot of people. They all have to get their hair done." I asked Candace how that has changed. She said, well, prior to the changes the internet brought about, I never had to do much advertising because my name carried weight through the campus and the graduate school. So if you were a black pre-law or pre-med student, I would know who you were pretty much as you were coming into the school because people would tell them about me and then they would book an appointment with me. But now, since there are only a small number of African Americans at the university and those few people aren't looking up at each other, because they're all staring at their phones was the implication, we are losing the art of conversation and how we used to verbally pass information, so my name started dying down. It kind of reminds me of how in elementary school there are songs that kids sing and they continue through the generations. All kids know certain nursery rhymes and songs, even the ones their parents sang when they were little. It's like those songs are trapped in time. We as African Americans are storytellers. My name is not being talked about anymore because young people don't talk to each other anymore. I was able to afford a modest lifestyle. Prior to these changes from the stock market crashing and now this way of doing business through technology, life has become an uphill battle and I felt like I was drowning. I've actually considered leaving, but where would I go? Where would I go? Look, I'm very much used to diversity, but when the campus stopped admitting so many blacks, I became a minority in a way that I had never felt before. You think of the university as being part of the community, and the community would benefit from the university. But I don't think they thought about what would happen to all the businesses who supported those students. Where would the students and faculty go to get their needs met, like their hair cared for? I mean, other students can go down the street, other students meaning non-black students. Other students can go down the street to anyone, but the black students have to have a car to travel 30 minutes across town. Why are they required to have a car or transportation when no one else needs that to get their hair done? Candace was directly impacted by the shifts away from affirmative action that decimated the admission of African Americans to public universities over the past 20 years. She says sometimes people are in a highly competitive arena and they need to go to a non-judgmental place where they can be themselves and where they don't have to apologize for the way they speak or their culture or wonder if they have to go to a Caucasian hairstylist and if they can handle their hair. To be a black woman, I say in the book, to be a black woman and to need hair care can be an isolating experience. And for any of you who have hair that isolates you, then you know what I mean. She said, the quality of service I provide touches more than just the external part of someone. It's not just about their hair. A lot of people are away from their families and they need someone to trust who will support them. People do like to be recommended to someone they can trust. I asked Candace how the internet changed things for her and her business. She says, back then, when I had many more clients, there was no internet. A personal computer was almost like a concept, but not a reality for most people. At the beginning, you had a lot of younger people on the cutting edge of computers or who were more computer savvy and up on the current trend. My generation was a little bit slower to comprehend and participate. The internet has developed a new age of the infomercial and the how to do it for yourself university. The internet is now showing everyone how to do it themselves and how to cut out the middleman. They've created the new customers. New consumers have less value for small businesses. They just think because they watch the new infomercial that they can do it themselves, buy it themselves, make it themselves. Also because you can purchase everything for yourself, the new consumers now feel entitled. They feel no shame with coming in and snapping photographs. They collect your hard work, all your information in 2 seconds by taking pictures of all of my products so they can go and purchase them online instead of from me. When things started changing so fast technologically, using the computer was an easier transition for me because I had taken a few Mac classes on campus and to adapt to what was going on. Because of this, I was familiar and I was comfortable with exploring the unknown. I quickly realized the internet and Yelp told people that I did not exist. I think algorithms don't take into consideration communities of color and their culture of trusting in the web with our personal information, and that we are dealing with things that won't even allow us to give someone a review. We don't like to give our personal information out like that, and just because I don't have reviews doesn't mean that I have no value. Because the computer, or I guess the internet and Yelp, is redefining who is valuable and where the value lies, and I believe this is false. It's not right. The algorithm shouldn't get to decide whether I exist or not. So I had to figure out within my financial limitations, because now it becomes another financial burden to stay relevant in the eyes of what the web is telling people about who is valuable. I had to be creative and spend a lot of time on the computer trying to figure out what was the least expensive way to be visible with the most impact. So when I discovered Yelp and its alleged benefits, because I don't think it really benefited me, I was forced to participate in Yelp. So I asked her what was participation with Yelp like. She says, she says, they tell you that everything is free, like they're doing a community service, but later on it's basically pay to play. They call on a regular basis to get you to spend a few $100s a month to advertise them with them, and if you don't, they are going to push you further down their pile. I can be sitting in my chair searching for myself and not find me, and find me 10 pages later. I can type in every keyword like African American, black, relaxer, natural as keywords, and white businesses, white hairdressers, or white salons would clearly come up before me, along with people who have not been in business as long as me. I think they need to put in how long someone has been in business in that algorithm, because I don't think it's fair that people who are brand new are popping up before those of us who may or may not be on the internet but have more experience and are more established do. And another thing, black people don't check in, which is a feature in Yelp, and let people know where they are at when they're sitting in my chair. They already feel like they are being hunted. They aren't going to tell the man where they are. That made me laugh. I have reviews from real clients that they put into a filter because it doesn't meet their requirements of how they think someone should review me. So I said, tell me more about that. And I'm coming to a close. She said, I think Yelp looks at people as their clients, not mine. If they are your clients who are loyal to your business and you, they are not interested. They want to market to my clients. And if you review me and you've never reviewed any other businesses, they are not going to take you as a serious voice on Yelp. What is that about? They are selling to the reviewers. Since I am the only black person in this neighborhood doing hair, that should tip the scale in my favor. But it doesn't. If they were honest, it would mean I would go to the top. But they are promoting and biasing the lay of the land in this area, which is causing me more harm by making it look like I don't exist. I have been on Facebook and pulled up some of the folks who work at Yelp, and from my perspective and from what I saw, there weren't that many black people. It wasn't diverse. You can see everyone on Facebook, and these people are not black people, and that's a problem, because how would they even know to consider the needs of a minority or what your language is? You are telling us we have to use certain keywords, and you don't even know our language because you think that black hair means hair color, not texture. We don't call each other African American. Society calls us that. Do you know what I mean? We are black. You know, they locked me out of Yelp. When I sent them an email asking them why I wasn't on the first page of Yelp, and why, when I'm sitting in my chair, I can't find myself, and why, when I use certain keywords, I couldn't find myself, I told them that by doing that, they are suggesting I don't exist. At that time, they put most of my reviews in a filter and locked me out for about 4 months. Every time you make a change on Yelp, there is someone checking on you. If you go into your page, there is someone looking at what you're doing. I know that because if you get people inquiring about you, Yelp will call you and try to get advertising from you, and they will say that they see people trying to connect with you through Yelp, and then they will try to sell you advertising. They will try to show their value by saying they can help you get more business. I used to have my own page, but now you have a third of a page with people who are similar to you. And if they don't choose you, they are showing your competition. For a fee, they will remove your competition, but otherwise they are showing your competition on your own page. You don't have your own page anymore. You are on a page with advertising and your competition who are similar to your style, and they will put them up against you while searching on your own business. They'd rather put salons in other parts of the city to avoid driving the clients to someone who is not paying for advertisement. So I would do something like put up a picture of myself, as this was something that they suggested, and I used keywords to be found, but that doesn't help now. Before, Yelp would encourage the business owner to upload a photo of themselves, and that was great for me. This is when being in the minority would help me stand out. That didn't last long because they stopped showing your headshot, and now they put up a map instead of allowing you to see your own image. Your own image isn't shown. Before you get to my photos and my reviews, there are suggestions to other people who could be as far as 5 miles or more away. The first one is laser hair removal and extensions. I don't do laser hair or extensions. So this is Candace's experience with Yelp. And you can read more about her if you pick up the book. It's really interesting when you think about the way, again, that these algorithms function in a decision-making context in the very real lives of people, right? And how that kind of, again, our socialization and our reliance with like a disconnected sense of the people. And so Candace's voice is one that I really wanted to emerge in the book as a way to have us get the human impact of some of the kinds of technologies we're invested in. I say that we have more data and technology than ever, and more social, political, and economic inequality and injustice to go with it. In many ways, all the kind of promise of technology has not it hasn't alleviated a lot of the social concerns that I know many of us care about in this room. I'll say, and this is my last slide, that the crisis of technology overdevelopment has broader implications than just the things that I've been studying so far in the United States. So, here I've been looking at Google and Yelp and kind of misrepresentation, use, participation, diversity in Silicon Valley. Those are some of the things that I've been looking at. But increasingly, this is leading me to do more work in looking at things like the extraction and mining industries and the disposal industries, because this is where we have hidden from sight a whole host of implications. What does it mean that now we have in places like the Congo and the Democratic Republic of Congo, a global hotspot for humanitarian crisis? The United Nations reports that in the Congo you have kind of the worst, most violent experiences of rape kind of per capita than anywhere else. That's very much tied to the mineral wars that are happening in the Congo and, by extension, into Rwanda. And so we have to think about the ways in which these minerals are implicated in every one of our electronics. And, of course, we live in the place where the desire to constantly upgrade and the political and social implications of those decisions are hidden from view. What's also hidden from view is like where does this stuff go when we're done with it? And so what you see now, for example, in the west coast of Africa and Ghana, you have huge e-waste cities, toxic e-waste cities that are emerging. Of course, they're in China and other places too. And this, I think, is really important because we stand at a really important, I think, moment in history. We have incredible investments in things that are quite literally destroying the planet. Our ICT's investment, our overdevelopment, and maybe overcommitment to those things are directly implicated in resource shortages that are happening in other places of the world. Of course, we know that conflict and war are also implicated in that. And so these are some of the places that I'm going with my work and that I hope to spend the rest of my life talking about and maybe shaping. I'll end with saying, I asked my girlfriends many times, I'm like, was it so bad when we wrote a letter to each other? I mean, was it horrible? I felt like it was so great having 5 or 6 days to respond before I had to put it in the mail instead of having 30 minutes or someone's dying because I haven't responded yet. So why might we want to reconsider some of these investments and maybe even turn in some new directions? And so I'll leave you with that, and thank you so much for being so generous with your time today. If you have time, I have time. I'm kind of good. Thank you.
Dr. Noble, I'm particularly curious. I was actually working in Silicon Valley until about a year and a half ago. Are the tech companies not receptive to the idea of how social scientists have such valuable things to say about narratives and about accurately reflecting and about ownership? Like someone like Google, who's such a large company and has their fingers in so many different things, I would imagine that they would be interested in hearing what you have to say.
I don't know. I mean, maybe they've never invited me, so I'm going to call it no. I'm not sure if it's just about again, a technical fix. I mean, part of the problem, the logic has been in the past, let's just say, like, call it like the 60s and the 70s, that if you had more diversity in an organization, that particular points of view would be represented, right? And that somehow we would have some mitigating interventions upon previous practices. You know, Google's very invested, as are most tech companies, in hiring people who are young, very young, right? Not as old as me, not as young as me, however you want to look at it. And I can tell you that the generation of young people right now are hyper invested in things like colorblind ideology. Not seeing color, not seeing culture, not wanting to talk about race, right? Not being averse to engaging with those topics, as if somehow to be critical of racism or racist practices or white supremacy makes you racist, which is ludicrous, right? So the level of education, I think that we could argue, if we just say that the traditional hiring practices of the past that are based on demography, right, would create the interventions, I would say, are not really happening. Or that might not be the right strategy. So yes, you know, could I organize a think tank of brilliant people that could advise tech companies? Certainly, I could do that in a day. That still might not deal with the broader global implications that the tech companies by nature are, in terms of by design, I should say, are incredibly implicated in, you know, environmental destruction and disaster, right, and these kind of predatory global business practices. So the question is then, what would one give up in order to shift that? Google would probably approach that, as many other tech companies, as a design problem. So, okay, that'd be interesting then. If we then take it as a design problem, then I would say, you know, if I were leading the tank, I'd say, the think tank, I'd say, design this so that no one dies. That's a hard design problem. We certainly have brilliant people who could help us solve those kinds of problems. But, you know, the profit imperative is greater than the humanitarian imperative right now, I think, in the Valley. And you see that just on the surface of, like, how VC funding gets not distributed to women of color, for example, or, you know, people of conscience, I would say.
The city streets in Fremont still had potholes. I lived there for 3 years, but we know that Silicon Valley built some ways. I can appreciate your point.
Yeah. I just wrote a paper with a book chapter with Sarah Roberts from Western Ontario about called Through Google Colored Glasses, and it's about kind of the class warfare that's happening in San Francisco as a result of, you know, the incredible gentrification. And, you know, we parallel that kind of metaphorically with Google Glass, and this idea that Google Glass makes you an explorer into some type of territory that you are entitled to interrogate with your Google Glass, right? Regardless of how people don't want to be intervened upon. It's quite a brilliant metaphor for what's happening in big cities where tech companies are kind of taking over and radically shifting the landscape and pushing, you know, poor and working class people out. So it's a complex problem. It's systems that we have to intervene upon. I don't think it's just like hiring people of color is going to solve it. It is an important step. It's an important piece. It's great. I'm glad that you are here instead of there, too.
Any other questions? Well, yeah, so first of all, I love your middle name.
Thanks.
The feeling of togetherness, is that what it is?
Yes, unity.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what search engines do we use? Or do we go use Google and just go straight to page 5?
You could do that too.
Okay.
This is the problem. I'm not sure that it's just throwing out search engines, right, or replacing. Google is excellent, as are all commercial search engines, for banal kinds of information, like What times does Starbucks close? Find the nearest Starbucks, whatever, the thing is that you care about. It's great for those kinds of things. It's not great for black on white crime, right? So I think what's important is for us to try to intervene upon and resist the idea that search engines somehow have the answers at the very moment when public libraries, public resources, public schools are being decimated. Going back to you, listen, when was the last time corporations paid taxes that went back into the public good, right? It's been a long time. So it's that tension, right? That, what would have happened? I mean, we have to ask ourselves if Dylan Roof had libraries or librarians, radical librarians, librarians of conscience, right? Well-informed, not the librarians who did the metadata for the art images, right? Who weren't quite dialed in. But what if that had been the place to go for information? So somehow we have, on our watch, I think, while we've been fighting to hold on to the library is losing its importance. And you hear administrators often talk, for example, in higher ed about, what do we need the library for? We got the internet. I mean, it makes me ill to think about it. Whoever did that, that was right, because it is a kind of situation. So I think it's kind of like a reframing of what should we think about the search engine for, like this much. But then when we have these broader kinds of questions about society, humanity, education, that not be necessarily the go-to for credible, reliable. Because again, some of these ideas that we're talking about are highly contested, even in the university, right? Among departments, among faculty and thinkers, and have been for decades and centuries or more. So that our algorithms are reframing that dynamic and having us think that there are instant answers or that there's a solution, and even socializing people to think about the solution versus the struggle over ideas, right? That's a long and kind of protracted, some might say dialectical process. That is something that I think the socialization of algorithms is also taken away from us, and certainly a younger generation. So that I use Google, I use DuckDuckGo. I try to keep the privacy settings, maxed out. I think I could have given a lecture today on surveillance society that would have been different and also terrifying. So, those are the things we need to be thinking about.
Okay, so I'm not technical at all. My understanding from my kindergarten perspective is that these algorithms that you're talking about are derived from how we use the internet.
Partial user behavior is certainly a part of the decision making, but if you look at, for example, in the case of Google, they have a lab. They say that there are over 200 different criteria that go into the fine-tuning of their algorithms. So there are
the algorithms, the fine-tuning of the algorithms, that's important. So the algorithms are already there, coming in, or being developed.
They're written by people.
Yes, that's
yes.
What I'm saying. That, to me, like I teach I'm 47, I've got a 9 and an 11-year-old. I teach them that the internet is the McDonald's of information.
That's good.
Right? And I tell them when you Google something, you never take the first 5 things because, see, look, it's an ad, they want to sell you something, or, so we go through things like that. But, at the same time, I see it as really it's a mirror of us, and I don't like it any more than you do. But I don't use the internet in the way that a lot of people do. I don't have porn on the internet, not, well, won't go really far with that one, but you know what I'm saying, right? It's just not part of how I use it. So really, to me, ultimately, I think we have to take responsibility for how we are using the internet. Aren't there other types of internets out there, too? There's this one that everybody uses, but aren't there other sort of webs that, really high-tech people can access the internet? Yeah. Well, anyway, but you see what I'm getting at? I think, like, ultimately we have to look at ourselves. Now, I don't use the internet in a way, like, nothing you've said here today supports method. You know, in the same way that the Bish editors responded to you, right? And I agree with everything you're saying, but at the same time, like, I think, yeah, like, how come we have graduates coming out of an entire generation who thinks that this is credible? Like, I don't get where we're coming from with that.
Yeah. Well, I think part of it is, I would say, you know, I take more of a kind of a political economic critique of the internet, where I'm less interested in kind of the narrative that individuals have to be responsible for what they find on the web. I mean, in some ways, you know, people talk about the filter bubble, right? And that you're getting back, reflecting back what you've previously searched, and we should be afraid of those kinds of things or be concerned. There are other studies that have shown that personalization is really not, what you get is not just about where you've been. So, you know, we could debate that. I think that and I'm not making this critique specifically about you. I'm saying this is a popular narrative, so I want to give a disclaimer. It's a popular narrative, kind of in a neoliberal environment, that individuals are responsible for what happens to them, including the misinformation they experience, that we should know better, right? And I think that is the,
But it's taking advantage of that is wrong. Like, that's why, to me, like Donald Trump doesn't have power necessarily because he's Trump. Because he's building on a certain type of mentality.
Yeah.
If nobody would be watching him, then he wouldn't have the power that he has. You know, if he would be able to turn it off on TV, then nobody would be, he would have less power.
But people are in a crisis. Here's the problem. People are gravitating to a polemical person like Donald Trump, in my opinion. This is my own opinion, because the structure in the United States is crumbling. Right? It's falling apart. People can't afford to buy houses if they live in cities. The public schools are terrible. No, do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. So what's easier is to say, like, it's those people, or to not critique the very kinds of characters that are implicated in destroying the whole, the economic systems.
I'm not saying he needs to take responsibility. I'm just saying I get where this is happening. I don't like it.
Yeah.
I'm not in favor of it by any means. Of course, it's terrifying. You know, but it's like the car crash or something. I mean, if maybe you don't need to see that text. Like, can't you just wait until you're finished driving? You know, or it's that sort of mentality that I need it now. I need to see it now. Well, maybe you don't need to see it. That's right. Like, really, does your life end if you don't see that movie or if you don't see whatever? You know?
Yeah, some of that's neurological and technological addiction, you know, and so those are other people are working in that area, and that's a super important area. I think this idea of the instant gratification, the instant kind of solutions, is part of this broader dynamic of, our technological addictions. Certainly, there's no doubt about that. I feel confident in saying that. And I also think that, the FTC, for example, in the United States, could say that Google's not a monopoly, because ultimately they're arguing, we could go use something else, right? Again, like, the onus gets put back on people rather than any type of protections, consumer protections from corporations. Yeah. So the 1970s is like the last time we saw a really strong FTC. Molly Neeson does great research on kind of the FTC's consumer protections for, like, protecting children from predatory advertising and that kind of thing. We've lost that kind of sensibility, and of course we know why, right? You can read David Harvey or a whole bunch of people to help us understand. So I think, again, this is why we have to just keep shifting this conversation. I'm not personally willing to put it back on, like, me and you as moms. We can save our kids because we're highly digitally literate, but it's on everybody else. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying you're saying that, but I'm saying that's a popular narrative. Yeah. Okay. All right. I don't want to abuse the time. I see people have to go. but I'll stay as long as anybody wants to talk. Yes?
Just a quick question. I saw you present at DLF and really loved it, and I loved the first part of your talk. I was really, really excited about the stuff you presented about Yelp today. Was that in your book, or is that in a forthcoming article?
It's in the book.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in the book. So the book is out for review right now, and hopefully it'll be out in next year in 2016. And I just read a portion of this interview with Candace. But, this is a way, again, kind of collecting these narratives about the human, because, some of the work that I do, I think, gets to be about policy, and we lose the faces and the voices of people. So I'm trying to do a little more kind of ethnographic interviewing here in this next year. So I'm glad to hear that the Yelp portion had any kind of impact, because this is my first time sharing it publicly.
But in a new way. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for the feedback. Okay.
So I'm just curious, now when you do a search for black girls, tell me you don't get the same thing.
You don't get the same thing anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just curious if you can comment on, in terms of algorithms of oppression, the black entertainment industry and how very powerful, Kanye West, Jay-Z, all these very powerful black men, and even Beyonce and that sort of thing. I haven't read any of your material, I certainly will now, but I'd like to hear what your comment is in terms of that whole aspect impacting views of black women, etc.
There are some people who are going to hear this and are going to laugh that I got a Beyonce question, because they know that's one of my triggers. Okay. Oh, it's fine. I think of entertainers as people who work for corporations, because that's, my orientation, having worked in corporate America for a long time before becoming an academic. They're extremely high-paid employees of major corporations. And they have certainly an incredible amount of artistic control over their work. And there are people who do a much better job kind of looking at their artistic production and kind of and culture. I think it's probably not appropriate to look to people like that to answer some of these questions that I'm asking. Yeah, they are implicated because, listen, like the old cliche, sex sells, violence sells, right? The worst things possible, kind of the lowest common denominator thinking sells. So you see that in the music business just as much as you see that on the internet, right? And there are some amazing, interesting Amar Christensen, for example, at Northwestern is doing some fantastic research on people who are not, in the headlines every day, but are doing really interesting and important black cultural production on the web, along the likes of Issa Rae and all kinds of other people who are using technology to kind of get some counter narratives out. I think of the Kanye, Jay-Z, Beyonce type of celebrity as, they're in the dominant narratives that I showed when I had the old media, new media slide. They're kind of in that context. I could say, this is probably the first time I've ever said this publicly, and I may live to regret it, but I was disappointed to see at the highest levels of power, for example, during the Obama administration, that the administration surrounded itself with these kinds of celebrities and entertainers. And Bell Hooks was never on the stage at the inauguration, or other people, black intellectuals, for the most part, certainly women of color intellectuals, not in these kinds of contexts, which I think signals, again, a certain kind of fetishization of celebrity culture and popular culture, that super powerful people would rather hang out there than with some professors, right, or other kinds of people. So again, also hanging out with all the tech leaders. We might ask ourselves the question, and I do often, what's the role of the intellectual class or the kind of academics in shifting public perception, public policy, et cetera. Very difficult because, as many of you know, universities are under attack, as are faculty. Wisconsin just doing away with tenure. I mean, it's like we could just go on. If you don't know that, that's horrible. So it's a long answer to say I don't think that it's just kind of like these key figures that should have to bear the responsibility, particularly people who, quite frankly, might have like just a high school diploma, right, or a GED or something, I don't know, some college, to have to, I mean, I spend my life reading books and reading research and talking. I mean, it's like what I do for a living. They don't do that for a living. So why would we, I wouldn't want them to do brain surgery on me any more than be responsible for some of the kinds of interventions that I'm talking about. I think they're implicated in some of the cultural production that they do, but I'm not sure that just shutting that down, that's not the answer, right? I don't think we need to censor that. I think we need to elevate other values so that falls into the place of entertainment, rather than that now we turn to Beyonce as like a thought leader. Why are we doing that? I just don't think it's fair to her or to any of the rest of us to do that. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. You guys are giving good questions. Yes.
Sorry, I just
okay.
want to kind of touch on a topic and you can ask a question. I hear the word interdisciplinary thrown around a lot, especially by friends and colleagues in the social sciences and humanities, and the definition usually stops within the social sciences and humanities boundary. What about, social justice principles and algorithms? What about that kind of thinking? Has there been any, especially concerning the kind of work that you do, has there been any thoughts on that, research on that, any kind of response to that?
Yeah.
I'm just genuinely curious.
I love that you bring up interdisciplinarity. When I was a graduate student, my friends and I used to laugh because we see ourselves as kind of interdisciplinary scholars. I was like the only person doing like Black studies or African American studies and LIS, right, and media studies. And critical race studies in my program. And one of the things that was always interesting to me in these interdisciplinary, say, grant writing committees or exam committees is that the social scientists and the humanists have to be conversant with the sciences and engineering, but they do not have to be conversant with us. And so the interdisciplinarity actually only goes from us out. It doesn't go from other fields back in. So that's something that's really interesting to me. And you see that, right? When I talk to engineers, they're like, I don't know what you're talking about, and no. And there's no desire to even be particularly conversant. So, it's like, how well-versed are the engineers in some of these kinds of, like, social construction of technology studies, right? But dismissive entirely of really important fields of work. So that makes me laugh about interdisciplinarity, that it's actually not interdisciplinary except for the people who take on the burden of doing the work of knowing 4 or 5 fields instead of just one and, kind of working just from that silo. So that's my thing on interdisciplinarity. It's limited because the people who we need to be engaged with, I would love to teach the kinds of work that I do and classes that I do in an engineering school or in a business school. I'd also like to get paid like the engineering and business school professors, right? But that's not happening. So people, there are a number of people who I would say are, I can't even name them. I do have on my website a list of blogs of people that I think are interesting to be looking at right now that are doing this kind of work around kind of a critical interdisciplinary information studies, technology studies. I think there's a great group at USC that's doing a critical code studies conference. I'm at UCLA, so I'm never supposed to say the words USC. But I do because I do. They're doing brilliant work. They're doing, there are some people in digital humanities who are also trying to engage in these conversations. What's harder is asking the question, who in engineering is doing interdisciplinary critical engineering studies? I'm still waiting for the answers. Do you know what I mean? So that's actually a place where someone could have a breakthrough and be quite brilliant. And it's not to say that there aren't some people, I just don't know them. I'm not familiar with their work. So if you do know of them, please send them my way because I want to engage with them. If we could find them, I think we could really talk about interdisciplinarity and impact and intervention, again, actionable kind of research. Yeah.
Sadly, I don't know anybody. I apologize.
Well, maybe you'll be that person. All right. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate your time.
I'm sorry, there are 129 people watching the live stream here with no way of asking questions.
Oh.
So we may have gone on.
Okay.
I think it takes like a whole slew of orders for the welcoming from Canada.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you to everyone that's listening on the webcast right now. I really appreciate your time, too. I know that if it weren't, in fact, for the technology, we wouldn't also be able to be connected right now. So thank you. Thank you again, Patty, for the invitation.